Hey everyone, so the semester wrapped, you know what that means, summer break, but I'm just gonna go over interaction design major type classes that I did this semester in case you're otherwise interested in what an interaction design type major encompasses, in addition to just like going over it in general. Sure, so first off, we have computer science for designers and artists. So I have my phone with me, so I'll just be looking at it briefly at times. So for this type class, it was learning Python from beginning to more advanced type stuff, given the concept that not all designers or creatives know how to code. So for this, we went from more introductory type stuff in terms of like what variable is before going to functions, lists, objects, more complex, more abstract type stuff later on. And the basis of this would be from eventually we used this app called Trinket overall, in which it's a desktop app in which you'd be able to program something up and then you'd be able to see it on display on the right. So for this, initially the basis we saw was the game that was being used to demonstrate these things all together at times was more this Pac-Man game that was coded out, and we pretty much have to code something similar to that, both for the midterm and then a more polished type version for the eventual final. And the more introductory type weeks, we just did some more basic things, just like creating just like some visuals with like HTML, CSS, and JS, in which we use shapes and colors to make just like faces or like other type things with our just like more introductory skills to like coding in general. And then as the weeks progressed, we got more advanced and more advanced, as you might imagine in a CS type classroom. So moving forward from that would be interactive design too, or otherwise in previous terms it would be called interactive prototyping. So for this, it would be similar to the coding one I previously mentioned, but this would be an extension of a previous term class, but this time around we made it so that it was an extension of a project or case study that we previously prototyped within just like Figma or Adobe XD. But this time it would be sort of like how in the real world, when you're like polishing up designs and you finally port it over to developers and give them the handoff. So this would be you more or less taking on the hat of a developer, in which we pretty much learned how to use React, we learned HTML, CSS, JS, and how to just like make our just like more static type designs into just like a more reactive, responsive, just like element through the eyes of a developer. And that was throughout the course of a semester, learning that and just learning and increasing our skills altogether in that scope, more or less. Moving on from that would be a class like Interaction Design 2, and this one was taught by designers at Google and Microsoft respectively. And for them, I would say that the more introductory type weeks were we were going through more theory and stuff to improve our craft in terms of learning stuff like Gestalt, learning stuff like concepts like breadcrumbs, like these different type design things all together in terms of how we could eventually implement them and how designers in the real world currently do so. We did that through creating presentations of which, for example, I presented on the New York Times. I talked about their breadcrumbs, their navigation overall, in addition towards just like how one would overall just like navigate a New York Times just like mobile app, scroll through things all together, get to their desired page, and talk through just like designers and why they do what they do in terms of these respects. In the later terms, it would be more or less a group project in which I worked with two people in which we built out uh, a project based on a theme we did from an affinity mapping exercise, more or less. So we eventually landed on humanitarian stuff, and we built out a project for elephants. In this project, I took on the lead for the mobile app, but we also had the other teammates build things out for tablet and desktop respectively. And then at the end of the class, everybody just like presents on these all together. This would just be the overall presentation, of course, and previous to this would be just like rounds of rapid prototyping, iterations, app critique, and otherwise with peers. Moving on from that, we have this class called Art of Research. So Art of Research is more or less just like this design research type class in which it's more or less the beginning to end stages of how you would conduct a research study, going over just like from the basic crafting up of research plan, research study, and research questions you're going to ask, to eventually implementing it and then gathering the findings and extracting it at the end of the day. So pretty much for this, it was a course of just like several months and being able to learn how to do so. But some of the things that we learned how to do were, to pull this up here, key points of interest were creating personas, user journey maps, secondary research or desk research, user interviews, and ethnographic research, among other things. So I mentioned ethnographic research, so for that, the core definition is like observing people in like their raw habitat, and I recognize that you have to typically do that in an in-person setting. So for this, we had to substitute it through watching people on online forums, how they interact, in addition towards just like maybe you join in and observe from like a Zoom call they're in during class or otherwise, because the primary constraint for that at the moment is the pandemic as is. But overall, for a course of that, it's creating this research study from the beginning to the very end, and then presenting your finals to the class at the very end of the class. And last but not least, we have this class called Design 2. So similar to Interaction Design 2, this one would be your more learning theory and craft in terms of being able to similarly learn about like design theory and design concepts and then applying them to more digital and analog pieces that you eventually build out. Digital and analog respectively being on if you do like more online artist type stuff, or you more are just like a more tactile, just like more wanting to do pen and paper type artist. But in course of that, we had to do both, just like half and half. And then eventually for midterm, we had to, after our critiques, in which we do week by week, we had to redesign those all together, critiques in mind, before our final project, in which we had to create a 3D contraction altogether, in which we'd have to pitch just like overall theme that we're going for, and overall project title, project reasoning, why we did this project, how we went about this project, and then before presenting in front of a class altogether. But I would say that's pretty much the core of everything I learned this semester at ArtCenter. And I would say the overall glue holding all these together in particular would be that with this art school, I find that critique culture is definitely embedded in there, in which you're not telling people that they have like bad designs per se, but it's more or less just like articulating like, oh, I think this art works well, or like your decision to do this works well in terms of XYZ, or this thing did not work well because of XYZ. I would say it's a lot more just like interactive in those type respects, but I would say that with that environment, it's definitely a lot more smaller and given that there's like 10, 12 students in every class, and it makes for a really great learning environment. But that's about all I have for today. But if you made it this far, thanks for watching, and don't forget to be awesome.